Thank you so much for joining us this morning. I think, like when you have the benefit of hindsight, you can go back in time and pick up, grains of pieces of information. I think the IT industry has been not only the engine of white collar job creation in India since the 90s, but it's also been at the forefront of creating, like adopting the best practices, whether it is the ESOP crorpatis, drivers becoming millionaires, to flexi work, etc. Having adopted a whole lot of new policies. Where do you see this going right now? Because as I said, from the services point of view, it has been at this center of innovation. Where are we as far as human capital innovation is concerned right now? What are the broad trends that you see playing out?
So this has been so I've been in TCS for 24 years, right? So straight out of university, like a lot of people at TCS. This has been an ongoing evolution where, in a sense, the tech industry, the IT industry specifically, and within large companies, IT departments themselves, tend to be bellwethers for thinking about the future of work, almost always, because technology-led culture change has been a reality ever since, I think, computers were invented, right? So prior to that, social change, culture change happened at a slower pace. And then since the 1950s, we've had technology change come first, and then culture change kind of follow that, right? And so in a sense, I think ERPs and these systems changed organization culture as much as, and nowadays, if you think about collaboration tools and video conferencing, Teams and Google sort of workspace and so on. So what is interesting is that that fundamentally, from a talent standpoint, it's been following the fact that software is eating the world. Something that conversation that you'll see everywhere. That everything is now manageable by software, right? So the only difference is that people kind of look at something like, say, a GPT and some of these things that are in the media right now and wonder that, are a lot of jobs going to go away? I've been in this industry. I think we've seen automation do this and transform roles over the last 25 years, right? So it's really a space where you have to continuously think about what kind of skills you need. Your skills have to be both deep as well as wide. And you have to constantly keep changing. You have to be interdisciplinary. The nature of the interdisciplinariness changes with time. So it is literally, the idea is that you have to wake up every day morning, convince employees that they have to rethink themselves, rethink their skills, rethink their roles, and upskill themselves constantly, right? I mean, they used to learn on Udemy and YouTube in the past. I mean, they would do that with ChatGPT, in the future and so on, right? So, in a sense, also the post-pandemic transition of a permanent hybrid mode, if you will, is the recognition that location per se is not important, and talent is going to be more widely distributed than only in just the large cities. For starters, the tier 2 and the tier 3 cities, but ultimately, I think literally anywhere in the world. Right? You're already starting to see global teams where I want to find the best, say, machine learning engineer. That person could be in Manila, Philippines, working out of home, or could be, in Bangalore, or could be anywhere else in a small town in India as well, right? So that also therefore means that you are designing your workplace in such a way that that people working remotely don't see a difference when engaging with people who are working. So that's one of the big changes you'll have to make to offices. You'll have to make changes to the way you hire, in the sense that we've moved away from hiring from a few universities to having a national entrance test where anybody can now join TCS and so on. So this is a continuous thing where you have to constantly stay ahead of the entire changing industry and the changing nature of work itself.
Since you talked about this whole location agnostic workforce, and that's what the initial, I think, uptake was when the pandemic started and most companies started announcing that it doesn't matter, people can work, and we don't expect the entire workforce to come back to work at any given point of time. You'll have 20%, whatever the percentages were. And then comes moonlighting. And that is an actual reality and downside of flexibility. So how do you see that playing out? Because there seems to have emerged a very clear friction between the workforce and employers. They've been publicly at war with each other. Where do you see this fight going?
See, this is, I want to sort of take us back to a little bit of history, right? In the sense that the modern workplace, as we see it, right, is really just a product of the last early turn of the 20th century American companies distinguishing between a blue-collar workforce and a downtown office, white-collar workforce. And the design of the office and the design of everything else, the HR departments and the payroll, and all of that stuff is still broadly based on that design. We really haven't changed much, right? The funny thing is that when you send an email, right, the send button is an envelope. Kids today may not have seen an envelope in their lives. Even more funnily, when you want to copy someone, it's a carbon copy, right? I'm sure most millennials have never seen a carbon copy in their lives, right? So the point I'm trying to make is that companies even today, even though they think they are technologically savvy and they adopt new technologies, they forget that their culture and their processes still encode the technological limitations of the past. Email is just one example, right? I'll give you another example, right? So we kind of found out that during the pandemic, as people were working remotely and so on, what we found out is companies really wanted to understand. Now, all of a sudden, they couldn't see employees. They're all remote. I don't know whether they're happy. What are they doing, right? So to strike that balance between creepy surveillance and literally being more empathetic to employees, the idea is to try and use some interesting big data tools that are able to give you some broad sense of how people are working. Are they being collaborative? Are they reaching out to others? Are there silos being created? And so on. Now you can have data, right? You literally know whether people are using Teams in the right way and so on. So what happened is that we kind of found out in many companies that 70 to 80% of the time that employees spend in meetings, online meetings, are considered unproductive meeting minutes, right? And often people tend to spend 20, 25 hours a week in meetings. 70% of that is unproductive. And you might wonder, what is an unproductive meeting minute? It's actually quite simple. It's when you're on mute, right? So basic idea is that if I'm spending time in a meeting, not talking, with the button on mute and just listening, why am I in that meeting? Right? Sure. Is basically just one-way information, and is that the best way to convey information to someone? By having them say, at this point of time, you got to log into a meeting just so you can find out what's going on, right? So in a sense, this is a failure of imagination when you think about the fact that this is sort of like in the 1980s or 90s, making sure that you're not going anywhere and to catch that one film on Doordarshan at 5 p.m. Otherwise, you're going to miss that movie. You'll never get to see it again, right? Versus a world where you should be able to see it wherever you want, right? The problem is we're already in that world, but companies still think that the best way to coordinate with people is to have a meeting, right? So in a sense, if it's one-way information, maybe it should just be a dashboard that is real-time visible to people, right? Why do you need to have a bunch of status meetings? A bunch of meetings can entirely be done away with. So the reason I give this as an example is that companies need to fundamentally rethink the rituals of work, right? The rituals of work are all based in the past, and we don't live in the past anymore. We live in a world where there is real-time information, a lot of things that you can do without necessarily getting 5 people into a room, and more importantly, the new program management skill is what work needs people to be in the office, because the realization of the pandemic is also that there are certain things people are great at if they have the flexibility and the productivity, but there are things people are terrible at, right? So that's the reason why offices aren't going anywhere, right? So we still need people to see face to face. They need to brainstorm. They need to build those, what I call the distinction between hard work and soft work. Hard work is what you do alone. Soft work is what you do with people, right? It's about coordination, it's about mentoring, it's about serendipitous exchanges, it's about brainstorming. So that is soft work, right? Now the new skill is figuring out how to balance that. And companies' policies and all of this is still like, oh, I will either do 100% office or some random number, I'll do 50%, I'll do 25%. It's not a formulaic thing. I think every unit, every team will have to figure out what's the right mix, and this has to be evolutionary. So as I almost always joke, that when people say we have a hybrid policy, it's basically saying that I have no clue, right? So I'm just going to use the word hybrid to mean whatever it means when I want it to mean, right? So in a sense, I think this is an ongoing discovery that companies have to do, and we have to rebuild that trust with employees. So the problem with moonlighting fundamentally is that we're thinking about roles in the traditional sense. The traditional idea was you had to be an expert, you had to work on one thing, that's what you got to focus on, right? We live in an interdisciplinary world where people need multiple skills. a lot of people will be capable of doing multiple things, right? Which means that companies need to institute ways in which I can tap into the full cognitive capacity of an employee, allow them to work across multiple projects. So that we don't have this moonlighting conversation. I would rather that a person in one project moonlight by working on another project within the same company, right? That you create that culture, then this becomes a non-issue on the longer run.
Yeah, and that's what, as Ms. Singhal mentioned, that it's not about the number of hours. It's about output at the end of the day and your productivity that you should be assessed on. Why is it that as I said, IT companies, which have been at the forefront of change, leading the way for other industries in best practices, why are they coming up with policies like, even if you're working for an NGO or if you're teaching dance outside of your IT sector job, you need to take approval? Not do really companies want to approve somebody teaching dancing or tutoring a child or pursuing singing as a hobby? Where is this coming from?
So in a sense, I think in a lot of senses, given that this industry is a bellwether for a lot of this, it's also going to be at the forefront of experimenting with a lot of policies, some of which are not going to work. It's fair to say. So, and you won't know whether something's not going to work unless you try it out and famously fail, and then you kind of move on to the other thing, right? So, in a way, it's sort of like A/B testing many things, if you will, right? So, I think, ultimately, every company, based on its culture, based on, I think, the customers and client needs. In many situations, see, often what happens is that when you're in the services industry working for a large, giant global corporation, your policies are not just your policies. Your policies have to intersect with the policies of thousands of companies around the world. And that intersection is often not very straightforward. It can sometimes be messy. It can sometimes be contradicting. Like, for example, there was a point of time, it's increasingly not so. There was a point of time when people had to leave their cell phones outside, before they're going inside. So there are these larger trust issues and so on. But those are slowly changing because the recognition is that employees cannot be productive unless they actually have access to real-time information and so on, right? So this is, I think, an ongoing thing. I wouldn't look at individual anecdotal examples of some of these kinds of policies because I think we will eventually kind of stumble our way to a model that ultimately works for everyone. So because this is a bellwether, you're going to start to see a lot of that experimentation in this industry first.
Right, super. Like in the US, for instance, over the last 2 decades, I think people holding multiple jobs has gone up to double digits, close to 20% now, which was in single digits, early single digits at some point. Do you see that happening in India as well, where people will hold multiple, and I'm not talking about the IT industry per se. Do you see people, because it's about skill set. It's not just about you do one thing for me and nobody else. I might be available to do something as like consulting, for instance. I might be able to offer counseling to students, for instance. Do you see multiple jobs becoming the order of the day?
Even for a small segment of the population in certain skills, absolutely yes, right? But before we kind of jump to assuming that's going to be the general trend, I think people kind of forget that there are tremendous complexities when you operate in a large corporate environment, in terms of legal, in terms of conflicts of interest, in terms of various other things that typically an individual may not be able to foresee. Right? I mean, it's very easy to say, you know what, I want to do these bunch of other things. But sometimes it's hard for you to figure out what other downstream effects it may have in an increasingly interconnected world where sort of butterfly effect of one small thing can sort of spiral, there's social media and all those other things, right? So in a sense, I think this is going to be sort of like this delicate dance where we'll ultimately figure out how this is going. So if even within the tech space itself, so let's take design, for example, right? Design for the last, user experience design for the last decade almost, has essentially, literally, necessarily been a person working across multiple things. No good designer just works on one thing for a long amount of time, right? It has already gone to that point. It's just that a few other areas around tech, on the adjacencies of that, will start to happen, right? So there will be a small pool of people who will necessarily sort of become, rather than work for a consulting agency, they may be one man, one person sort of consulting kind of things and so on. But it may not happen in every industry and every role, given the complexity, given legal and all of these other things. So this is an emerging space. I think we're definitely within India, we might start to see it in the same spaces you're seeing that in North America and Europe as well. But definitely design is a space increasingly. Certain kinds of technologies, again, you will start to see, sort of broad experts who might work across. But I think companies also independently within India need to fundamentally fix their ability to work with freelancers. Today it's quite complicated. Every freelancer has a tough time working with any large company, right? Right down to payments and right down to all of the other stuff that you have to deal with. So that increasingly, that ecosystem also has to get a lot more simplified. And then eventually, I think, see, at the end of the day, I think we again define, going back to the whole history lesson, right? So we define employment on the basis of something that we defined 150 years ago, right? That's not necessarily going to be the only definition going forward. Employment at the end of the day will be a spectrum from full-time, dedicated, highly confidential, proprietary industry kind of skills to a range of, to basically, shall I say, virtual human being, right? So there are already, eventually there'll be companies that will offer AI as a service, replacing a human being as a virtual human being, right? So there are already companies that kind of do that, right? So if you want to set up a contact center, there are already startups that say, you know what, we'll give you a virtual contact center with 20 people who will answer queries. They'll all be powered by AI and voice and video if necessary in the future. So there'll be this full spectrum of machines to human beings to various things in between, right? So part-time, project-specific, program-specific, task-specific, right? So depending on the industry, depending on the task, I think companies will need to invent new ways in which they can engage talent to get stuff done.
Super. Since you're explaining things so beautifully, I'm going to lump two questions together. One is that the IT industry in India, the services industry, has been, as I said, the forefront of white-collar job creation. And that was clearly because they were growing, a lot of outsourcing was happening, and business models were linear. More contracts, more clients meant more warm bodies required on the floor. I think with business models changing, with more digital revenues coming in, where the linkage between headcount and revenues is not as linear as it used to be. Does it mean that in times to come, the IT industry will no longer perhaps be the engine of white-collar job creation? And I'm not done yet. How will AI and how will new technologies kind of impact? Because this journey of automation came into IT companies, I think 5-6 years ago, right? That's when the automation, you started automating a lot of the low-end functions, right? Which was ticketing, etc. How do you see these intersect of technology, transformation of your business model coming together and its impact on workforce?
I think it's a great question because within the span of my own career, we've kind of seen broadly 3 or 4 massive shifts, right? And the problem is that sometimes our human bias is that at any given point of time, we feel that this is the big shift. It's bigger than everything else. The reality is that we've seen big shifts in the past, right? We've seen everything from a conversation around a cost-centric outsourcing of American jobs to India in the early 90s, so on, to the first wave of businesses first moving to the internet, during the 2000s, .com, to the first wave of companies saying digital and mobile. We're going to build iPhone. Once the iPhone came, we had to build iPhone apps, we had to be on social media, we had to use cloud and big data and so on, to now the next wave of that, which is use of machine learning, use of automation, use of newer technologies like blockchain and so on, right? So this is ongoing, except that obviously the time difference between these big changes is shortening. There's no doubt about that, right? And at every stage, TCS, for instance, has largely able to figure out and reskill literally all of its workforce across these changes. So there was a point of time in the late, when I joined, it's actually quite fascinating. So when I had to write a program for the mainframe, what you had to do was that it wouldn't be in memory, just like how you can just open up a laptop and start working. It wasn't the case, right? The memory was short, so your stuff used to get moved to a tape if you didn't use it for a while, and that tape used to be on a shelf. You had to send a message, call the data center guy. He would walk to a shelf, take one tape, load it into the mainframe, call you half an hour later and say, yeah, now you can work, right? So we've kind of moved from that to the point where you can do graphics processing on the cloud on demand for free, right? So in that sense, that job has disappeared. But by the way, TCS retrained that guy to be a database administrator at some point. And then we said, you know what, database administration is going away. Let's make you a cloud system administrator. By the way, cloud system administration is becoming automated. Now, let's actually make you a cloud architect, right? So I think it has also been I would actually say that TCS is people think TCS has been in the warm bodies business. No, it's actually been in the reskilling business. We've had to do that literally every 5 years, right? And so the last iteration of this, which I was personally involved in, was essentially figuring out a way by which we can reskill now 600,000 employees in a completely do-it-yourself, self-serve mode, because classroom training is gone, right? People can learn whatever they want. So curation and pointing people to learning journeys and saying, for your role, these are the additional skills you need to pick up. Otherwise, your core skill is going to become obsolete or automated. So therefore, we defined a metric called T factor, which says the depth of your knowledge and the width of your knowledge, and let people essentially drive themselves to learn on an ongoing basis skills that they need just in time, just what you need, as opposed to saying, I'll do a PhD before I do something and so on. So this has been the last iteration of that. Now, where is this going? It essentially means that when you philosophically think of it, when I was developing in the 1990s or the late 90s, 2000s, even Google wasn't there. My idea of a co-pilot was reading, say, IBM manuals, for example, right? And then Google came, Google became the co-pilot. I could Google for stuff, I learned, right? And if you didn't have access to the internet, you were at a disadvantage. And at some point of time, a combination of Google and Stack Overflow and GitHub and open source development became the developers' sort of co-pilot, if you will. I will not code from scratch. I will use somebody else's code and build on top of that. All of the modern day tech stack has been built on open source right now, right? It's now the next evolution of that is that I will use a conversational co-pilot like a GPT, like any of the other things that all of the companies will come out in the near future, and use that to make myself more productive and build stuff quicker, faster, right? So at the end of the day, what will happen is that the nature and the smartness of the co-pilot keeps getting better and better. But you're still going to need a human being to connect the actual problem to the actual solution, right? So that is, to be honest, it's an ongoing journey to keep discovering those points where you will need the human being. At least in my estimation, you're still going to need a lot of people, right? It doesn't matter, right? So don't be blown away by the fact that, there are so many things, all of these jobs, they will not disappear. They will, in a sense, in IT parlance, we kind of say there's something called L1 support. L1 support is, my computer is not working, what to do, and the person says, can you please turn it on, get the power on, right? So that's so increasingly you don't need L1, right? The question is only, from L1 it kind of moves to L2 to L3, guys probably solving slightly more complex problems. I think the L4 person might solve really, really deeper problems, if you will. And that, in a sense, I think is the challenge and the opportunity for the industry to continue to discover what are these newer age, higher level problems. Obviously, in a sense that it is obvious to think that if you needed 20,000 people to do, say, L1 support, you may only need 100 people to do L4 support at some level, right? Yes, that's quite natural. But what you're going to find is that every industry, in every part of the world, new industries, new intersections of businesses will require new levels of L3 and L4 support. So that therein lies, in a sense, the opportunity.
And with that, we're running out of time, but I will still ask you one question, which is something that we often talk about in our newsroom, which is that India has been known for not being able to enforce contracts, and that's a big issue for, companies, etc. Today, I think whoever you're doing business with globally, there are rules, laws, whether you are kind of following the best practices, not just with your external customer, but with your internal customer. And from that filter, I want to ask you that, and it's not specific, please do not get me that this is specific to your company. I think it's an industry practice. Some do it, some don't, some quietly do it. The fact is that letters which are being issued to potential employees are not being honored. People are not being onboarded. And not just that, salaries are suddenly being slashed unilaterally. Is this both in letter and spirit in keeping with the law of the land? And is this how the sector wants to be now viewed in the eyes of aspiring professionals who may have thought at one time that I may want to work for this company or that? Is this the way to go?
No, I think, so, at the outset, I do have to say that, as a, one of the things I'm particularly proud of is the fact that TCS has never had to do that. And that we've honored every letter down to the pay and down to, et cetera, right?
Yes,
but
I remember this even at the peak of the Lehman crisis,
yeah,
TCS did. I remember that.
Right, so in a sense that I think, but in a sense, it's also, I guess, at the very basic level, I guess it's also a function of your ability to plan and look ahead, and also be able to predict where your demand is going, right? So there's a very foundational tactical demand prediction skill that I think varies across companies. So there is that. The second is that I will also admit that this is increasingly becoming harder and harder in a world where the skills that you hired for, by the time the person joins, those skills have disappeared. It's a new set of skills, right? So, which also therefore means that you need continuous nimbleness in proactively reaching out to people. And something that we often done in the last couple of years is that we would hire people for a specific skill and they would join a year later. Third year we might give them the offer and so on. But then in the meanwhile, we actually open up our entire content and training ecosystem to those people and say, hey, by the way, you might want to pick up these additional skills. Because, by the time you join, this is what's going to be in vogue and so on. So that's also something that's kind of helped. And I hope the industry sort of embraces that notion of staying more in touch with their talent pool. Not just purely, I would actually say one of the things we do is we open up our entire content and training ecosystem, not just to all prospective employees. So in fact, there's a platform called Campus Commune that is open to all students of all universities who just want to sign up, right? And some of them may end up joining TCS, but we want to encourage everyone to continuously upskill themselves in technologies that are relevant and so on, right? So I think this needs to become more of a common industry practice. And that said, I think I also, to be fair to the rest of the people in the industry outside of TCS as well, these are, again, individual specific scenarios in a very complicated geopolitical environment where it's becoming harder and harder to predict the nature of business, the nature of demand, and the nature of how companies react to things like suddenly, all of a sudden, you can't work with this company because they have some relationship to Russia, Ukraine, so many other complicated things that kind of come up, which therefore ultimately somewhere down the line result in some of these bad news, if you will, right? In an ideal world, I think companies should have the ability to honor every 100% of those things and then figure out a way to reskill, cross-skill, and appropriately transform that talent. As I said, the IT industry is actually not in the bodies business, it's in the reskilling business, right? Because, the education system is not going to provide you raw material that is just ready to use, right? So that's the nature of how this is going to work, and it's going to take time for that to kind of catch up. And the businesses and business models are changing too fast. And so this industry needs to be at the forefront of essentially saying that as our chairman, Chandra has often said, that technologies become legacy. People never become legacy, right? So ultimately, if you can figure out a way to reskill people, that's what companies have to focus on.
You're an absolute delight because you've not ducked any question. You've taken every question head on and answered it and explained things. Very inspiring. Thank you so much, Krish, for joining us today.
Thank you. Pleasure.